Let's talk about what happened in Parliament yesterday. Kind of strange, I think. Interesting debate, this. The Tory MP, Richard Holden, has introduced a private member's bill aimed at banning marriage between first cousins. This is a practice that's been legal since Henry VIII's time, but it has never been felt that we need a law to stop it because it's very kind of rare. But Mr. Holden says that among some communities, it's becoming far more prevalent, far more common. And he says that because of this, because of the rise of this practice, intermarriage they call it, between first cousins, we need to stop it because it is a medical fact that such unions can produce babies with serious birth defects. Now, before we get your eminent view on this, Isabel, this is what the MP for Dewsbury and Batley had to say during this Commons debate. His name is Iqbal Mohamed. So this is Mr. Mohamed's take on it.
We should try to step into the shoes of those who perhaps are not from the same culture as ours, to better understand why the practice continues to be so widespread. An estimated 35 to 50% of all sub-Saharan African populations either prefer or accept cousin marriages, and it is extremely common in the Middle East and in South Asia. I would therefore urge the House to vote against this motion and to find a more positive approach to addressing the issues that are caused by first cousin marriages.
So, Isabel, he says that an estimated 35 to 50% of all sub-Saharan African populations either prefer or accept cousin marriages, and it's extremely common, he says, in the Middle East and South Asia. Now, you know, my feeling about that is that's up to them. That's up to them. This MP seems to be saying, because it's common practice in foreign countries, that we should allow it in Britain, which seems to me a strange argument.
Absolutely ridiculous. And frankly, I'd go further and say it's disgraceful. I've got news for him. He is a British parliamentarian representing the British people in the United Kingdom. I couldn't give a flying monkey about what goes on.
Well done.
I couldn't give it, you know, I really do not care what the culture is in some families in sub-Saharan Africa when it comes to our parliamentarians talking about the British people, whatever the colour of their skin, whatever their religion or whatever, they are people who are residing in the United Kingdom, and there should be no place whatsoever for this intermarriage in the United Kingdom. Why? Because it is overwhelmingly clear from the medical evidence that it creates problems. It results in genetic issues. You know, what happens is that if you've got people who are closely related and they're each carrying a recessive gene and they come together, that makes it much more likely that a child is actually going to suffer from an illness as a result of having both of those from the male and the female. So it has no place in our country. And, you know, perhaps the MP has a point when he says we need to understand why families in the UK are still going down this route, but that doesn't mean we need to let them do it.
Absolutely not. And I think it's kind of quite alarming that we have more and more MPs. I mean, there are quite a few MPs who essentially there are on a support Gaza ticket, who are there. They're in our Parliament, the British Parliament, in the House of Commons. They're representing sort of foreign countries and foreign interests. Now, you know, democracy is democracy. If you stand on a ticket that saved Gaza, you know, support Gaza, and people vote you in, then I guess that's, you know, as they say in reality TV, it is what it is. But I think it's alarming that we have an increasing, more and more MPs who aren't in the House of Commons to discuss British issues. They're in the House of Commons to discuss foreign issues, to represent Gaza, to represent, you know, intermarital practice in the Middle East and sub-Saharan African countries. I don't know what this guy's talking about, but he went on to suggest that in order to allow this practice to continue and to prevent marriages that produce kids with bad birth defects, you can produce very, very poor quality kids with these kind of unions. You really can. People who can't function properly, they're not only physically defective, they're also mentally defective as well. So he said in order to prevent this, perhaps the NHS could genetically test all couples who are intent on intermarrying. I mean, get real, Mr. Mohamed. This is nonsense.
Has he noticed the state of the NHS recently? The state of the NHS is such that it can't even reliably provide basic health care to a high standard to everybody when they need it. So the idea that the NHS should now also be required to provide genetic testing to families who want to intermarry, give me a break. Grossly irresponsible of him to suggest that. I wouldn't even want private providers offering genetic testing for this sort of thing. And I'm sure that that is what happens already. People will be able to go down that route, go to Harley Street and get some kind of genetic testing. And I suppose you could argue that's better than not having it at all. But, you know, disability is a very, very difficult and challenging and in some cases tragic thing. And there should be no making light of, you know, the suffering of children who are born as a result of these intermarriages. They are born with serious difficulties in their lives. And you know, he can say it's a sensitive subject, and maybe it is, but I don't have any difficulty being very clear about this. We shouldn't allow it, not in our country. And actually, I'm quite impressed with the Conservative Richard Holden for bringing this bill. I'm sure he knew it would bring him a load of grief, but it's actually quite a brave thing to try and do. And it is a sorry sign of the times that it should be felt necessary in our country to have this legislation.
And a last point on this, why do you think Labour is opposing this private members' bill?
Because Labour is reliably wrong about literally everything. And they've made no exception here, have they?
No, yes, I mean, it's another Labour howler, but their silence on this is deafening. They really should say something. As I say, the feeling was that although doctors would tell you time immemorial that this is not a good thing to do, this can produce children whose life will be really difficult, physically and mentally. Although we've always known this, the practice was so rare, it wasn't really worth enshrining a ban in law. But it has, as Richard Holden says, become quite common now in some communities in Britain. And that's why it's become pressing, in his view, that we do ban it, we do outlaw it. And I agree with you, Isabel. I think it's imperative that we get on the case pretty quickly and that we dismiss Mr. Iqbal Mohamed, the independent MP for Dewsbury and Batley, with the contempt that he deserves. By the way, you'll be not surprised to hear that he's a member of a group of independent MPs that include the great Jeremy Corbyn.